Good morning, everyone. Good to see you on this Lord's Day morning. This great opportunity to be together and study from God's Word. We are continuing our study in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're doing a deep dive into the book of Ecclesiastes. There's just so much powerful truth in this book. Just great things to learn to encourage us in our lives in service to God. And also, and we've been trying to point that out, there is the potential, and it happens, that Ecclesiastes can be misused and that you can take some statements in the book out of context and come to completely wrong conclusions. And unfortunately, some of our religious friends do that, and so we want to be prepared to explain the book of Ecclesiastes. We've been pointing out over and over and over again that you gotta keep things in the context of the book. And this chart that we've had up every week and that's in the front pages of your study guide, that really helps us because it tells us where Solomon is in his presentation. The book is generally divided up into 4 sections called 4 sermons because Solomon is the preacher. The book of Ecclesiastes means that. And in each sermon, as we've said over and over and over again, he goes first to the idea how life is viewed if there is no God, if you don't even think about God. And then in the second part of that section or sermon, he will begin to consider things with God in the picture. Now, we are in chapter 9, and we're ready for verse 11 in chapter 9. So if you look at your chart up there, you see that we are at the tail end of the first half of, or the first part of the 4th sermon. The 4th sermon, we think we would mark it as beginning at chapter 8, verse 14. It will run until we get to chapter 10, verse 1, and there will be a change there. Let's see, am I saying that right? Yeah. I was beginning to think I was wrong about for some reason wrong about chapter 9. We're right at the tail end of chapter 9. So again, if you look at the chart, the tail end of chapter 9 is going to be in that first half of the 4th sermon. So he's still in this section talking about the futile, frustrating, vexing notion of life on earth. And when you view life on earth without God, it is a meaningless existence. Okay, so let's pick up. If you're looking at your study guide, we're at question 15 on chapter 9, verses 11 and 12. Chapter 9, verse 11 and 12. I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wine, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. For man also knoweth not his time, as the fishes that are taken in an evil net, and as the birds that are caught in the snare, so are the sons of men snared in an evil time when it falleth suddenly upon them. All right, so viewed from a this world perspective, what guarantee do you have if you are swift, skillful, strong, wise? What guarantees do you have that everything will turn out favorably for you in this world? Well, you really don't have any guarantee of that. Because he says it happens to all. Time and chance happens to everybody. Viewed from just a this world perspective, if you're a man of skill and wisdom, you have no guarantee over the guy who's just, a complete foolish individual who possesses no real skills at all. He may turn out, in fact, it may turn out that he prospers more than you do. And so, you feel that you have certain real skills, and you've applied yourself, and you feel like you act pretty wisely in life. But here's this guy over here. But you're struggling. You're certainly not getting ahead. You're sort of scratching along, just trying to make ends meet. Here's this other guy over here, and he's just, first of all, he's not a good man. He does not exhibit great wisdom in the things that he does, the decisions that he makes. And actually, when you really analyze it, he doesn't possess any real skills. And yet he's getting rich. I'm over here struggling to make ends meet, and that guy's getting rich. And so that goes to the kind of frustrations that Solomon sees in life viewed from a just this life perspective. And it is kind of frustrating, isn't it? If this is all there is, if this life is all there is, and here I've tried to be a good person, I've tried to be a kind individual, I've tried to wisely live my life, and I'm not making it, man. I'm just not getting there. But I know this other guy who doesn't do anything right, and he's prospering. And I'm telling you, it's just tearing me up. This is so frustrating to me that it's like this. Well, he says that's the way it is in this world. Notice he used that trigger phrase, I saw under the sun. That is, on earth, just in our physical existence. These are the realities. And you really don't know. He says there in verse 12, you don't know what's going to come upon you. Yeah, you'll be like a fish caught in a net. You'll be like a bird caught in a snare. Suddenly it happens, and you can't avoid it. It just happens. I believe he's completely accurate in this observation from a this world perspective. He's completely accurate. And I wonder, don't you, how do people keep going? What if you are one of these guys and you're not getting ahead? You're really not making it from this world's perspective. How do you keep on? I don't know. I don't really have the answer to that question. To me, it's mind-boggling. Jeff?
I think the last line in that reading where it says it falls suddenly upon them, that's a gift from God. Because if we knew years ahead of time when we were going to die and how we were going to die, it'd probably drive most of us crazy.
Oh, I think that's true. In the sense that, we're not, even from God's perspective, we're not guaranteed how our life is going to turn out. But the guarantee that we have is this is not all there is. So I think you're right. And so when he says there at the end of verse 11, time and chance happeneth to them all. That's true. That's true of us too. We're trying to live for God, right? But time and chance happen to us too. But the difference is we have a view toward eternity that the carnal man does not possess. And that's what makes life worth living. Not that I'm going to live as a Christian and I know I'll get ahead if I do. No, I may not get ahead. These preachers like Joel Osteen on TV who preach the health and wealth gospel. Live for God and you'll be healthy and wealthy. There's no such promise in the Scriptures. You may be poor and sick, in fact. But if you are, you still have this view of going to heaven in eternity where everything will be perfect. With that view, you realize these things are temporary. These setbacks and frustrations are only temporary because I get to go to heaven when this life is over. Thoughts or comments here, Wade?
I think that regardless of our situation, obviously God has us in mind. And I think that we gain strength on times that we are pushed down. I mean, if you think about it, there are people that are living today that don't have what we have. They don't have comforts in their home. They live in very poor climates and very poor societies where they struggle for food and clothing and shelter, but yet they may have more strength in God's word than we do because they're constantly pulling to it versus we sometimes let the things that surround us, even though we may think we're living in good times, we may not be.
Yeah, I think you're right. So let's say you face a bad health issue or a huge financial reversal. If you're just living for this world, those things are devastating. But if you know God and you're living for God, then, as you say, those things can even strengthen you spiritually. But if you're just living for the world, they just ruin you. It's devastation. All right. Clayton?
I want to get your opinion on God's plan versus time and chance. So if I'm killed this afternoon in an accident, is that God's plan or is that just time and chance?
Well, there's some aspects of life that are determined by God. In other words, you're not going to live forever. You have a life expectancy. Those things are set by God. But if you're hit by a drunk driver this afternoon and killed, I don't think that was God causing that to happen. It was caused because that other guy made a bad moral choice and he killed you. But that's time and chance. I mean, it could happen to you or it could happen to the next guy. But so there is this element of time and chance. In the very biggest picture, God has set bounds. I think the scripture, one place, and I can't recall the verse, he sets the bounds of our habitation. In other words, there's certain limitations as to what will happen in our lives that are determined by God. But in general, if I suddenly made a windfall, let's say they discovered gold on my property. There's $1 billion worth of gold on my property. I don't think God caused that to happen. That's time and chance. I didn't know it. I happened to buy that property and lo and behold, it was covered up in gold. Well, that's time and chance. I don't think God determines that. So I think I would answer it that way. Both good and bad can happen to us, and we don't know. And the fact of the matter is, probably what happens more often than not is bad things happen by time and chance rather than good things. But we're blessed too with time and chance. But I think Solomon was making the point here that even to the wise and skillful, they may hit hard times, and it could devastate you if you didn't know God. Monty, did you have a thought?
I was going to point out that a lot of people, religious teachings will tell you that you don't have any choice on anything you do, that it's all been predestined by God. Every turn, every step, everything you do, the clothes you put on this morning, God had predetermined that from eternity. And I think this passage here, when it tells us time and chance happens to all men, refutes that. Because we're talking in the beginning, Adam and Eve had a choice. They didn't have to eat of that forbidden fruit. Cain had a choice. God even came and gave him an extra chance to get his sacrifices right. So all the way throughout the Bible, we're talking, we have to make choices. And that God doesn't predetermine everything that we're going to do. And so I think it's important to understand that. Because if God predetermines everything that we do, then we don't have a choice in it. And technically, we can't sin. Anything we do is what God's already determined we're going to do. Yeah. So there's no sin. So everybody's going to heaven. But nobody that I know of believes that. Yeah. So it has to be that we have a choice. As it's saying here, when he's talking about here that the race doesn't always go to the swift. Sometimes the fastest runner trips and falls so the win the race. Or something happens. So there are certain things that are just time and chance, and other things are by our choice. But ultimately, what God has predetermined is that we're supposed to all live faithful to Him and go to heaven. Yeah. But we have a choice. It's not set in stone. We don't necessarily do that.
I think you're right. Back to Clayton's question about time and chance. Not everything, and Solomon's not saying everything. Not everything is time and chance. Some things are time and chance, but not everything is time and chance. So, I've heard people say, for instance, to parents whose children have grown up to be faithful servants of God. I've heard people say, well, you're lucky. You're lucky because your children are faithful. No, it's not luck. It's not luck. Or you're lucky because you have a good marriage. No, it's not luck. That's not time and chance. That is the fruit of people following God's plan in their life. So to your question, Clayton, I don't think everything is time and chance. Some things are time. Time and chance happens. It happens to us all. But not everything is just an accident, a chance of nature. I don't think that's true. Wade?
Clayton's question too, you know, in what, kind of what you said, God is all-knowing. And there's some things that God may choose not to know. But if he does choose to know that that person's going to kill you today, and he does know about that, then is that not an intervention basically from God? I mean, because he chooses not to act. When he
God has chosen to allow us to exercise free moral agency. So that is a choice by God. And we don't live in the day of miracles. And so he's not going to intervene miraculously. And so he lets some things take their course because he's made some determinations, big, broad determinations like free moral choice.
And we know God can't lie.
Right.
And so God has limited himself on some things.
Yeah.
He can't intervene because he can't lie.
Yeah, so the drunk driver is on a head-on collision course with Clayton's car this afternoon, but God makes his car mysteriously float up in the air and go over Clayton's car and go on down the road. He missed Clayton. He didn't kill Clayton. No, he's not going to do that. He's not going to do that, right? So some things like that he's limited himself.
But we pray for safe travels too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. All right. Anybody else?
The length of our lives is not predestined, though, because the Bible tells us we can lengthen our days or shorten our days by the way we live our lives.
Right.
So we're not predestined.
That's right. We're not predestined, right? Clayton?
I agree with what Joe was saying. I do think there are things, though, I feel like he had his hand involved in. And most of us probably say, an introduction to our spouse.
Yes.
That doesn't feel like time and chance. It feels like maybe that's what he wanted, of course.
And I think you're right. We do believe in God's providence, and that's absolutely true. And so I guess what I'm saying, like I said earlier, I don't think everything is time and chance. Some of it is by virtue of our choices that we make and our actions that we perform. And some of it is because God blesses us providentially in different ways. But some of it is time and chance. So it's a mistake to view that any one of those things is the total answer to what will happen in my life. All right, good thoughts, interesting. All right, let's read a little bit further here. In verse 13, this wisdom have I seen also under the sun, and it seemed great unto me. There was a little city, and few men within it, and there came a great king against it, and besieged it, and built a great bulwarks against it. Now there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no man remembered that same poor man. Then said I, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. The words of the wise men are heard in quiet, more than the cry of him that ruleth among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroyeth much good. All right. So I think the scenario that he describes is pretty easy to imagine in our minds about this city. It's just a little city, but a great king comes against it and he builds siege walls around. It so happened that there was a poor wise man in the city who obviously gave counsel to the city dwellers as to how they could overcome this dilemma, and they did. His wisdom delivered the city. Now we don't know how that turned out. We don't know what he said. We don't know how he delivered the city. But his wise counsel delivered the city. But what happened was he was almost immediately forgotten, and the people of the city did not recall that it's because this guy was so smart and he gave us good advice that we got out of this trouble. We'd probably all be dead now if it wasn't for this guy. No, they didn't remember him. They quickly forgot him. They did not remember that same poor man. So, again, realize he's talking about frustrating realities of life on earth, particularly life on earth without God. And his frustration here is that guy should be honored. That guy should be granted special privileges. high standing in people's minds. He should be really respected. He's not. Well, in a fair world, he would be, but this is not a fair world. And so again, that's kind of frustrating, right? Know that that's true. Have you ever known a situation or been personally involved in a situation maybe where you gave somebody really good advice and they rejected it? Or you gave somebody really good advice and they did what you said and never turned around to say thank you for having helped them in that situation. My guess is that all of us, to some degree or another, have been in that kind of a situation. Man, I am so upset because I should receive special praise and honor for the good advice that I gave. And I've not received that respect that is due me. If this life is all that there is, then that's really an upsetting reality. But in the big picture, it really doesn't matter. Whether that guy that I gave advice to respected me or not is not a big deal. In the eternal picture of things, it's not a big deal. So again, you see the difference. Monty.
Jesus said if you do things to be receiving a reward from men, that is the reward. We're supposed to do things with an eternal outlook and ask and hope for a reward from God. So if we're doing things, giving this advice or doing whatever, it's nice that somebody does recognize for us, but that shouldn't be our motivation. We need to be doing right because it's the right thing to do, helping others because it's the right thing to do. And if they return and give thanks, fine. If they don't, okay, we still did what was right. We should derive our satisfaction from that.
I think you're right. All right, so then verse 16. Wisdom is better than strength. Okay, well that's a pretty true statement just in general, even when it comes, let's say that you had this enormous tree that needed to be moved off of your property. You could just try to do it by your brute strength, and it's going to be a lot of work. But you could say, now there's a better way to approach that. I will do this or that. You employ your wisdom to make that job easier. Wisdom is better than strength. Strength without wisdom is just going to mean more work. So it is a true statement. Wisdom is better than strength. But here's the frustrating thing. The poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. And that goes to the little scenario that he had just described. The reason that guy wasn't remembered for delivering the city is because he's a poor man. And so they just forgot him. If he had been one of the rich leaders of the city who delivered the city, they would have built a monument to him. But he was just a poor man, not respected, and so they forgot him. That just happens. It happens in this world. The words of wise men are heard in quiet more than the cry of him that ruleth among fools. I think there's some other translations of that. I think the idea of that is you should quietly listen to the words of the wise man more than the shouts of the fool. I think that's the idea of that verse. It's kind of a little bit unusually worded there. You're better off to listen quietly when a wise man speaks than to pay attention to some foolish man who's shouting at the top of his lungs. Listen quietly to the wise. Wisdom is better than weapons of war. So basically here he's recommending the value of wisdom. Even from a worldly perspective, wisdom is desirable. Wade?
The Home Christian Standard says, the calm words of the wise are heeded more than the shouts of a ruler over fools. Yeah. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner can destroy much evil.
Yeah. So I think that's the idea. even and get it, we're still in this section of this sermon. Even from a this world perspective, you're better off to pay attention to wise men and what they and the counsel that they will give you in all matters. In war, if you were engaged in a physical war, you'd be better off to listen to a wise man who gives counsel, who says, quietly says, here's what I believe would be the best course of action. He says it calmly, he says it quietly. Versus the guy over here who's shouting and carrying on, but he doesn't know what he's talking about. Don't listen to the foolish man who's making a big noise. Quietly listen to the wise man who gives counsel. But his point is that's not typical. That's not what typically happens. We even have some sayings, don't we? The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? The guy making the most noise is going to be the one who gets the most attention. And that's not always good. Jordan?
I was just thinking, a lot of people say the Bible's old and outdated, and you hear all the time, man, we're living in the worst of times and all this kind of stuff, but you think about what he's saying right here. The mob mentality that is out there today is the foolish that are loud.
And they're getting all the attention.
And I think all the time, where's the quiet, wise person? And hopefully in this building is where we find that
I think you're right.
sanctuary. But the Bible's so relevant.
It's timeless. Exactly right. Exactly right. Other thoughts here? Anybody? All right. The last phrase, I don't know about you, but the last phrase seems a little bit out of joint in this discussion that we've just engaged. But it's a neat standalone observation. One sinner destroyeth much good. That's a good standalone observation. I think Solomon is just ready to switch over to the godly point of view. And this may be sort of transitional statement, but it's true, again, even from this world's perspective, one guy can destroy the good that a lot of people do. And it only takes one act of evil to destroy the combined efforts of a lot of good people. That's I like, and I've used that phrase before to make the point. Here we are working together in the local church. A lot of people trying hard to do good things that are beneficial and promote the cause of God here on earth. And that just goes, and that's been going on. And then one member gets out in the community and lives sinfully, and people notice it, and the whole church gets a black eye. All the good that has been done has been destroyed by one sinner's bad choice. That's really a valuable truth. Jeff?
And you see that, the Joel Osteens that have these mega churches that draw on money, they think all religion is bad. That's the way the haters, like we said, view all Christians.
Yeah.
It's the Joel Osteens that want to make the money.
Yeah, you get these televangelists and many of them, I don't know that Joel Osteen particularly has, but many of them have been exposed for their hypocrisy. They live in these extravagant lifestyles, and then some of them, of course, have been exposed as even terribly immoral people, and so then you get what was that guy's name? Jim Bakker, Jimmy Swaggart. Those as you say, those kind of people give a bad name to religion in general. Exactly right. All right. Any more thoughts or comments here? Look at our chart up here. We're ready to transition into the last part of the last section here, beginning at chapter 10, verse 1. All right, so let's pick up that discussion. Chapter 10, verse 1 of Ecclesiastes. Dead flies cause the ointment of the apothecary to send forth a stinking savor. So doth a little folly him that is in reputation for wisdom and honor. So that's what makes me think, that statement is what makes me think that maybe the last phrase of verse 18 should have been in this section. Because it's very similar to the idea, just a little folly does to makes the person who has had a reputation for wisdom and honor, his reputation is ruined by just a little folly. He goes on to say, a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left. Yea, also, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him. And he saith to every one that he is a fool. Okay. What's the ointment of the apothecary? We don't talk about. I don't know that I've ever seen any ointment of the apothecary. What is that, Monty?
Well, this I think it says perfumer's ointment.
Yeah.
It's got the idea of a sweet smelling salve or balm
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
But you let some flies get in and die, it rots and smells horrible. It's not this sweet smelling ointment anymore, but it's this nasty stuff you don't want to get near.
Yeah.
It only takes one little fly to get in there and corrupt
Ruin it all. Exactly right. People back in those times, even into more recent times, were really given over to ointments, especially ointments that smelled good, because they didn't bathe nearly as often as we do. You know, a lot of people in the world today think we are crazy to take a shower or a bath every day. Now you're going to wash your skin off, you know. In fact, even here in past generations, it was not typical to bathe as often as we do. And so because of that, I don't think about ointments and perfumes and stuff like that. But they did, because body odor was a real issue. And so you anointed yourself with these sweet-smelling ointments. And so they were very aware of it. We were less aware of it. But you understand what he's talking about. So you got this sweet-smelling ointment, but a fly gets in it. Well, first of all, if you saw a fly in it, you probably wouldn't be all that interested in rubbing it all over yourself. It's had a fly in it, for crying out loud. But even beyond that, it would serve as a growth medium for the germs and so forth that the fly carried in there, and it would spoil it to the point now it doesn't even smell good. It smells rotten. So, and it only takes one. So you got this whole jar of ointment, and it's just one little fly. It's really not very big. It's just one little fly in the ointment. It doesn't matter. It doesn't take much to ruin it. And I think that's why I was saying that I think the last phrase of verse 18 probably belongs with this verse. One sinner destroys much good, just like a fly. One fly in the ointment destroys its value, spoils it. And he says that is what happens when a man of reputation, he has a reputation for wisdom and honor, he allows himself to engage in just a little folly. Just a little folly. Have you ever known a situation of someone who did that? Sadly, I think we all have known that, and probably, sadly, we probably all would have to confess that we at times have been guilty of such folly. The idea here is it's much to be avoided. You've got to be conscious of that and work hard to avoid it. You're going to ruin your reputation. You will not be honored if you allow yourself to even have a little slip up, just a little folly. It's going to destroy your reputation. And so the warning is here, don't allow that to happen. It just takes a little. It doesn't take a little. So here's a Christian, and his general course of activity is good. I mean, overall, he's a really decent person. But people have known him on occasion to, drink. He doesn't drink a lot, but he's been seen out drinking, just a little. And the fact of the matter is, I don't even think he got drunk, but they saw him at the restaurant, and he was drinking wine with his supper. Oh, I'm surprised. I didn't know that about him. I didn't know he would do a thing like that. So just a little folly. It doesn't take a lot of folly. Just one occasion like that. Or here's a guy And he identifies as a Christian, and we know him to be a Christian, and he seems like a really decent person. His folly is that he allows his temper to flare, and he gets angry without cause. He doesn't do a lot. He does. What happens? That little folly, and it is folly. I can confess that personally. That is folly. So you've been doing good for a long time. You've been doing good, and then you allow this little bit of folly, and it destroys the good that you've done. So it's a great warning. I need it as much as anybody, but we need to understand there's not room for a little moral folly. We've got to be strong on a consistent basis. What's it mean in verse 2 when it says a wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart is at his left? What does that mean? Monty.
It seems to be that typically in the Bible, when we think about things going to the right hand, it's approval. God's going to put the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. So I think he's talking about here the wise person that is going to be approved or do things in an approved a better way. But the foolish person is, instead of his mind being on the approved things, they're going to be on the unapproved things or the unwholesome things.
I think that's exactly right. Reference Matthew chapter 25 where Jesus pictured the judgment. The sheep on the right hand, the goats on the left. So as Monty said, the right hand denotes good and approved, whereas the left hand is rejected and cursed. And so, where's a wise man's heart? The wise man's heart is in things that are good and proper, where the foolish man's heart is into evil and despise and wicked things. I think that's a really good understanding of that. Yea, also, when he that is a fool walketh by the way, his wisdom faileth him, and he saith to everyone that he is a fool. So here's this foolish guy, and his wisdom fails him. In fact of the matter, he doesn't have much, and his wisdom fails him. But he's walking by the way. What's he doing? He's about his normal activities, right? Walking by the way just suggests in the course of his normal activities, he says to everyone that he's a fool. He doesn't live by wisdom. And everybody who's aware of his life and his conduct says, that guy is not wise. You know a lot of people. And I don't think we often do this necessarily, but if I said somebody's name to you that we all know, you'd probably have sort of an immediate impression in your mind of that person. I mean, you may not dwell on it, but if pressed to make a decision, is he wise or is he a fool? You know, right? Based upon reputation, you know that this guy has shown and demonstrated good wisdom in his life. This guy, on the other hand, has not. So what Solomon says there, he says to everyone that he is a fool. He's not out there verbally saying, I'm a fool, but his life is demonstrating that he is. Right? So again, pretty straightforward there. All right, let's keep reading. Verse 4. If the spirit of the ruler rise up against thee, leave not thy place, for yielding pacifieth great offenses. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, as an error which proceedeth from the ruler. Folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. I have seen servants upon horses, and princes walking as servants upon the earth. All right, now, again, here's a place where our general rule is an exception to our general rule there, because he uses that phrase, under the sun, there in verse 5. I've seen under the sun. But again, I think that's under the sun. He said, I've seen this among men, and it shouldn't be so, because he's, I think, now speaking from a more godly perspective, but he has seen that this is a thing that happens among men. Verse 4, he says, if the ruler rises up, against thee, leave not thy place. So the ruler is doing something here that is not right. He rises up against me. I mean, he's mistreating me. The ruler is mistreating me. the wise man stays cool and collected even when he's being mistreated by an evil ruler. And he says, yielding pacifieth great offenses. This is a tough one for us. I don't think it's probably as tough for people who live under other kind of governmental circumstances. This is tough for us because we have been raised as independent, free people. And if a ruler rises up against us, that is, he oppresses us, he's doing us wrong, I'm not going to put up with that. I'm not going to put up with that for a minute. I will rise up and I will oppose this kind of oppression. Solomon says, actually, he says, leave not thy place. In other words, don't even allow that sort of thing to provoke you. Yielding pacifies great offenses. In other words, so they're passing some rules up in Washington, D.C. that I don't like. Am I going to be the leader of a rebellion against Washington? No, I'm not. I may, because I have the privilege to speak out against such things under our system, at least for the time being, I have the right to speak up against such things in our system. I may speak out against them, but I'm not going to lead a rebellion against that. Yielding. So, unless the rules of men contradict the rules of God, we've talked about this, I think it's a great challenge to us, but we've got to be submissive to civil government. Even when they're doing things we don't like, yielding pacifieth great offenses. Ooh, that's one to think about. Monty?
I'm reminded when I read that passage of, I guess the last time Paul Smith, I heard him preach, he was talking about there had been a big battle and the king of the victorious army commented about the king was the one that struck down the enemy king. And one of the soldiers spoke up and said, oh, actually, I'm the one struck him down, not you. And he talked about the serious torture and the way the guy came to his end because he disputed with the king about that. And so when I get the notion out on this, is that if the ruler says something, just let it go because you're not going to get yourself in a bunch of trouble over it. Just go on, it doesn't matter. I don't have to speak up and say, as he's talking about yielding here, I can yield the floor to him. If he wants to say he killed him, okay, fine, he killed him. It don't matter.
Yeah, I think that's right. Dale?
We kind of know our place.
Yeah.
Great, wisdom brings about success. Foolishness or folly, as you would call it, usually don't ever lead to success.
Right.
Don't lead to the downfall.
I think
That seems like this is more what's happening here.
I think you're right. And then, real quick, we're just out of time, but he says, here's something that I've seen. He uses that phrase, and it's a little bit out of our general rule of interpretation for Ecclesiastes. He uses that expression under the sun, but he's basically saying, here's something that I've seen among men, that folly is set in great dignity, and the rich sit in low place. So here's a guy, he's a foolish man. He has no real skill set at all, and he's made the ruler. And then those who are rich, probably rich in not just necessarily in money, but rich in good works, rich in wisdom. So the fool sits in dignity, the rich sit in low places. Servants ride on horses, and princes walk as servants upon the earth. He says it's all upside down. It's completely upside down. The foolish people are in charge, and the wise people are ignored. People who ought to be in positions of servitude are actually rulers and princes. That is, people qualified, highly able. Those kind of people are the servants are riding horses, and the qualified people are walking. So basically, he's saying there, this is one of the things that you see among men. Unqualified men rise to seats of power, while those who deserve honor are treated as common folk. I wonder, just a thought here, and we'll pick this up next week, Lord willing. You think that Solomon might have been having in mind there, as he wrote that, about his own brother Absalom, who tried to rise to power undeservedly? In other words, here's this guy, and he's not wise, and he has been elevated to high position, and King David was forced to walk out of the city, and people throwing rocks at him as he went. I wonder about that. We'll talk about that a little bit more next week. We'll try to pick up right there.